Carter, in his frustration, sent the Marines over in an attempt to pull these people out. That turned into a disaster. Military men killed. The Iranian students got a hold of their bodies, and they were going to desecrate them. Carter didn't know what to do, and he called the Pope. Is there something Your Holiness can do? Yes, there is, as a matter of fact. Archbishop Capucci. They asked him, would he go and talk to the Ayatollah Khomeini?
Is there insight into the Middle East that we have not heard? How about a rescue operation in Lebanon that happened quite a few years ago, as a matter of fact, 1983? So we're going to talk about that with Father Charles Murr, author, philosopher, theologian, psychologist, and polyglot, by the way. Figure out what that one means. About his book, The Syrian, Hilarion Capucci and the Priceless Ransom.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Hey, I want to welcome Father Charles Murr. They had a whole list of qualifications, Father Murr. One of them was raconteur. Is that an insult or is that a compliment? So when I was reading about you. So welcome, Father Murr. How are you?
What a great way to start out. But anyway, yeah, a raconteur is a storyteller. It's a fancy word. When you don't know what to say to make something sound that's bland sounding more interesting, put it in French or Latin. You mentioned another one of my descriptives, a polyglot. One of my kids years ago at the orphanage had learned that term, and he was talking to a friend he had over for dinner, for lunch or something, and he said what he meant to say was, Father Carlos is a polyglot. El padre es un polígloto. But he said, el padre es un polígloton. Father is a polyglotton. This is the time of your book, the Syrian, which I just found fascinating, as a time near and dear to my heart. I joined the military at 17 in 1980. And of course, we had the embassy bombing in Beirut in early 1983. I think that was about April of 1983. And then we had the barracks bombing in, I think that was October or November of 83, where all those Marines were killed in those bombings. And your book is set right in the middle of all that craziness that's going on in the Middle East. And so just let me ask a couple quick questions to set the stage here. About how old were you when all this is starting up? I can tell you exactly. It was in 83, so I was born in 1950. I was 33. And boy is it sounding young today.
Age is a state of your heart, right? It's however old you are here. But so this young 33-year-old man has these two giant men in his life. And pardon me if I mispronounce the names, but we have Hilarion Capucci, and tell us a little about Hilarion Capucci, if you would, please. And am I saying his first name correctly?
Hilarion, yeah.
Hilarion.
Hillary,
right,
but he's Greek. I found it's funny because I'm writing another book, and it was Night. It's its working title anyway, and I'm right in this very section. It's a much longer book, and this is a very brief story in that larger story. But I'm talking exactly about the first time that I met him, and the first time that I met him was in 1977 in Rome. I was coming home. There was a character on Jackie Gleason, Crazy Guggenheim. I see, I'm dating myself, but he used to start out every story. He'd say, "I was walking home, minding my own business. I wasn't doing nothing." Right? Anyway, I was walking home from school. Driving home from school actually, and I was going to turn on to the street where I live. And as soon as I got to that street, I saw flashing red and blue lights and cop cars everywhere blocking off the street. I couldn't turn onto the street, part of Rome right by the Janicolo Hill where I lived. And I asked one of the policemen there, what was happening? I mean, this is where I live. He said, "Well, you're going to have to walk. Can't get through." Entire crowd blocking the entire street. I mean, hundreds of people. I parked the car and went to go to get to my house. I couldn't move. I was surrounded by people on all sides. And the curious thing was, They were all men, young men and older, and they were all dark-skinned. At first, I thought they were speaking Sicilian, like a Sicilian. No, it was Arabic. Okay. Well, you don't. When you're walking down the streets in Rome, you don't happen upon a demonstration of Arabic-speaking men, right? I did. And I'm trying to get to the front gate of my house. Finally, I got there. And as soon as I got to the front gate, I was trying to describe this correctly. As soon as I got to the front gate, there was a divide. I had walked through all of the Arabic men, Arabic speakers, and right at the front gate, there was another group of people. They were facing each other. Couldn't exactly get who they were. And then I realized that they were insulting each other, screaming back and forth. The noise level was incredible. This part was Arabic that I had just walked through. The other part was Jewish. I'm assuming Roman Jews. This half, elated to be there. The other side, the Jewish side, protesting, right? And all I'm trying to do is get into my house. And I have no idea what this is all about. As soon as I got to the gate, there are two other officials there with machine guns. I mean, it was crazy is not the word for it, right? Anyway, they had to call another man who was inside, and the superior, the nun who ran the house, who was in charge of the house, to identify me so that I could get into my own house. As soon as I get in, I went up to the third floor where my room was, and I met Monsignor Marini. Now, those who have read my other book, Murder in the 33rd Degree, know very well who Monsignor Mario Marini is. He worked in the Secretary of State of the Vatican. He was my godfather. My real mentor. I wouldn't be a priest today without him. It's that simple. And he and I were living on the third floor of this residence for priests. We were the only priests in the house. And then all of a sudden, I went immediately to his room. He's sitting in his room, wondering what in the world is going on and waiting for me to get home so he could there were no cell phones in those days, right? Communication had to be face to face. I went into his room and he told me who it was. It was that we just received a new visitor. And as a matter of fact, not just a visitor, a man who was going to live in the house with us. He was the Archbishop of Jerusalem, the former Archbishop of Jerusalem, Iranian Capucci. And I saw him in the hallway, dressed like an Orthodox priest, with the headdress and black veil, beard, everything. The whole thing was almost surreal. Anyway, it turns out what Marini knew from the Secretary of State, Capucci had just been released from prison. And I'm sitting listening to this. I'm 27 at the time. I said, released from prison? What are you talking about? And then we've got riot squads outside and police frisking you to get into the whole thing. It was like somebody turned the whole world upside down. And he said, he said he was released from prison. I said, what was he in prison for? He said, arms smuggling. I said, just a minute, arms smuggling? He said, yes, they caught him with arms, rifles, this and the other thing, in the trunk of his car. Oh, and let me not forget dynamite and detonators in the trunk of his car in Jerusalem, bringing these arms in for the PLO, for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think my mouth was open. And I said, where is he going to live? Right down the hall. He's going to live right down the hall. I said, and Mario said, we may all be killed. We may all be dead before midnight. We were the only two priests in a house for priests. It was built for that purpose by the Lebanese Sisters of the Cross. They were running this place. Great women, really, really good and pious women who took this as an apostolate for priests. And all of a sudden, we had a third cleric in the house, and it was the former Archbishop of Jerusalem, or as he preferred to call himself, the Archbishop of Jerusalem in exile.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming.
Listen, I've got to tell you, because if you think you might be laboring under the misconception that I didn't like Capucci. I did like him very much. I grew to like him an awful lot. I saw the goodness of this man. And you're saying, well, now, how can that be if he's a smuggler, an arms smuggler? How can he be good? I guess that's a complicated question, but I found him personally good. I found him a good man, a caring man, a loving man, a man who had suffered a lot. I don't know where he was in his own spirituality with what he had done and everything else. I think he had come to terms with it, but he truly believed in the Palestinian cause in Israel, absolutely, and he was 100% for that and for them. And then I learned that he was going to live there. He's not just staying for a few days; he was going to live there, and that this was part of the Vatican agreement with the Israeli state. That he was, I believe, he was sentenced to 12 or 14 years in prison, and he had been in prison for 2 years. The Vatican negotiated his release from prison, and you've got to understand too, the reason that Israel was interested in releasing him was to have a chip in the diplomatic game. At this time, Israel was not recognized by the Vatican as a state. Okay? They did not have formal relations with the Vatican. Now, why is that important? And I think this is important to explain. The Vatican maintains diplomatic relations with many, many, many nations. Principally, some of the strongest ties that the Vatican has are with the Islamic nations. People don't realize that. They have full diplomatic relations. They always have. They always have right from the beginning. Now, the reason that this is important is that other nations, for example, the United States of America, did not have full relations with some of these countries. Therefore, they would go through the Vatican. They would go through the Vatican to communicate with these governments and back and forth. This is a school. These are the schools of diplomacy that exist. I know it sounds like a lot of people call it BS, and I mean blue smoke. When I say BS, I'm talking about blue smoke.
Or bad stuff. Bad stuff is another one. Yeah.
Bad stuff. That's a good one. Bad stuff. There you go. Bad stuff, but it's really not. There's really a purpose for it, and it helps to a great degree. Anyway, here's this man in our house. He lives at the end of the hall, and I started having breakfast with him every day after Mass, and I found him to be just a very amicable man, very good, very, very pious, a man of much prayer, to be sure. And always a smile, very witty. You talk about a raconteur. He was a raconteur, very engaging in conversation, and always made sure that everyone was brought into a conversation. He had a real charisma about him. Now, when I tell you that this house was run by Lebanese nuns, and it was primarily for the Lebanese clergy who were in Rome. Well, they had many bishops, Lebanese bishops, stopping by the house, staying at the house when they were on ad limina visits to Rome and the like. They stayed there. I don't know how to explain this to people, and I didn't know it. I had to learn it. There was a sort of clash between the Lebanese and the rest of the Arabic nations, the other Arabic countries. Well, first of all, the Lebanese don't consider themselves Arabic. They consider themselves Phoenicians.
We talked about one of the major players. We didn't talk about the other major player in your book, and I say Joseph because of my German roots, Joseph Curry, and hopefully if I'm not pronouncing his name right, please correct me.
Joseph Curry was
okay.
It was funny because when I met him also in Rome, but Joseph Curry was the bishop of Tyre and Sidon, the biblical cities. Yesterday we had the widow of Sarepta in Tyre, Sidon, was mentioned. Well, he was the bishop of Tyre and Sidon, right? And from those days, and one of the most intelligent men that you could imagine, brilliant philosopher and theologian, but really brilliant, and also gifted with, he had what we call in Spanish el don de gentes, the gift of people. You could be a believer, you could be an atheist, you could be a Republican, a Democrat. It didn't matter. He had a way of connecting with people that was marvelous. I went with him on a trip to Geneva once. We drove from Rome to Geneva to meet some businessmen, Lebanese businessmen, which was a fascinating trip in itself. It was a joy being in his company. Also, a delicious sense of humor. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't have the Catholic faith, and if you don't possess a sense of humor, you've missed out on the whole thing. You really have missed. You're missing out on the whole reason for life. I mean that. I see people who don't have the faith. I don't know why what they're living for. I don't get it. And I see people who are dead serious about everything. Everything as if everything were just absolutely, totally, 100% serious, and they're unhappy in their existence on here. And I don't understand them either. I've always had the two of them together, and life is kind of a fun adventure. I find it very interesting life. But anyway, Joseph Houry was the Archbishop of Tyre and Sidon. I was sure he was going to be the next Cardinal of Beirut. And he should have been. He should have been. A great man, great political mind also. Anyway, Joseph Houry is a friend of mine. Hilarion Capucci is a friend of mine. However, the two of them are not friends of each other. Let me put it that way, right? For these nationalistic, not religious, they were brothers, they're both archbishops. But this nationalism that came into play and comes into play so often, we talk about racism or nationalism. These are all things that if you understand them correctly, they can be real pluses. But if you don't understand them correctly, they can be real negatives also. And these two clashed. Let me just put it that way, they clashed. However, I saw something always on the part of Archbishop Capucci that I found more noble than Archbishop Houry. Capucci didn't hold a grudge. Now, where he got that, I don't know, but every once in a while, there would be little zingers of insults. Somebody would come and say something to him that was hurtful because of his past, undoubtedly. He had been in prison. This was nothing to just overlook as if it never happened. And there were a lot of people who resented that. The Archbishop Houry resented the fact that Capucci had done what he did and had been in prison. He found that a shame, an awful shame for the church. And it is a shame. Don't get me wrong. It is a shame. I understand that. But you don't deal with, look, I'm a priest. I've been with all sorts of scoundrels in my life, surrounded by them. For about 4 years, I had lunch almost daily with the devil. That's another book. But I'm telling you, you don't just wipe off everybody who's imperfect from your life. You can't do that. You can't do that and at the same time call yourself a priest who's trying to build bridges and bring people to God and God to people. You don't do that by just cutting people off, right? Anyway, there was one incident that I remember because I saw it, and I remember it very, very well. Archbishop Capucci was leaving the chapel. He had just said Mass. Still investments. And the way we had the chapel, it was easy to open a door and hit somebody with it because the door opened outward rather than inward.
Yeah.
Anyway, while he opened the door as Houry was passing by, you remember that in the book, I think.
I do.
Right?
I do.
But there was this great indignation and no words of an apology oh, that's nothing or don't. And I just remember being struck by that. I said, here are these two great men. They're both archbishops, one of Jerusalem, nothing less than Jerusalem, and the other one of Tyre and Sidon. and they're acting like children. Well, let me just say this too also about Capucci. I got to be very close with him when I was there in 77, 78, and part of 79. And one day we had breakfast. He and I had breakfast often together. And it was a marvelous way to start the day. It was just always good. And he was an up man. He was always positive. Anyway, this one particular day in, I believe it was 78, he said to me, no, it had to be 79. He said to me, keep me in your prayers today, especially, won't you? I said, sure, but he'd never asked such a thing and in that way. I said, is there something the matter? He said, no, just if you can today, remember me in your prayers. And he said, especially in your mass, okay? I said, certainly, absolutely. Well, good. That same evening, I think it was the same evening, we're in the community room watching the news. In Italy, at that time, the news was on at 8 o'clock at night. And everyone in the hall, and everyone in Rome watched the news at 8 o'clock at night. That's what you did. I'm watching the news. There's this story that all of a sudden I see on the television set Archbishop Capucci. And I'm looking around, and the Lebanese are also there with me watching this. Yeah, it's Capucci. I said, Capucci, where is he? He's in Tehran. A plane had picked him up that morning and flown him to Tehran. Listen to this. This is what's amazing, and I found it really amazing. Jimmy Carter, President of the United States, had called Pope Paul VI, desperate to get our hostages released from Tehran. They were in the American embassy. How many were there?
57. I'm not sure.
57. They were being held there. They had been held there for the longest time. I don't know, almost a year. And this was a political year. If you remember correctly, if you don't remember, I'll tell you. Carter was running against Ronald Reagan. And this issue of the hostages in Iran, that Carter could not get them back by negotiation or anything else, was a major political issue. Carter, in his frustration, sent the Marines over with helicopters in an attempt to get into the embassy, pull these people out and take them away. That was a disaster. That turned into a disaster. And I believe, I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe there were 11 military men killed in that attempt to release the hostage, right? Well, here's the thing. The Iranian students got a hold of their bodies, of these American military men, and they were going to desecrate them, tie them up behind vehicles and drag them through the streets of Tehran to be desecrated by people. For the time being, those bodies were set apart. But this was what was going to happen. Carter didn't know what to do. And he called the Pope. Why? Because the Vatican had diplomatic relations with Iran, and the United States did not. And he says to the Pope, here's this good old Baptist deacon, right? He says, Holy Father, is there something your holiness can do, right? And this, all of a sudden, it occurred to them and to the people in the Vatican. Yes, there is, as a matter of fact. The entire Muslim world loves Archbishop Capucci for helping the Palestinians. Just an aside, in parentheses, we were receiving letters, postage, every day from Syria, from here, from there, with stamps of Capucci's figure on the stamps. He's the stamp. It's him, Capucci, the 12-cent stamp or whatever it was at the time, right? Of these nations. So they took him, they asked him, would he go and talk to the Ayatollah Khomeini? He knew the Ayatollah. They were on friendly terms. So the Vatican flew him out on a private jet, I'm sure paid for by the United States government ultimately. He landed there, spoke to Khomeini, got the 11 bodies of the servicemen in caskets, and they were loading them onto the plane. And Capucci is standing there. You can see him in photos, blessing the coffins as they took them back, without having to have them desecrated or anything else, right? Now, while he was there, also did something else. He insisted on visiting the hostages. So he did visit the hostages. And while he was visiting, he was on a mission. He had a little clicker with him, counting that they were all accounted for. He visited each one of them, just hello. They thought he was just stopping by to say hello. It was a little bit more than that. He wanted to make sure that they were alive. He came back. The negotiations were done for the hostage situation right then. The Khomeini agreed to release the hostages with Capucci. The problem was that French television journalists got a hold of the story and blew it up before it happened. Right? Yes, but it was done. Anyway, Capucci came back home. He came back home like nothing. He was there for Mass a few days later. We had breakfast together. I said, I saw you on television. He said, did you?
No, nothing more.
Really, what I'm trying to say with all this, Mike, is the following, and then I'll shut up for 2 minutes. Here, you've got this man who's ostracized. He's the black sheep. He was in prison. He's good for nothing. He's a cause of our shame, our Catholic shame. Oh, really? Oh, really? God had some work for him left to do. And he's the only one in the world who could have done that. He's the only one in the world who could have done that. And he did it. And he did it well. Isn't that curious how God uses things and people? It is.
We have many flawed characters in the Bible. Paul oppressed the early Christians and becomes
my favorite is David. My favorite is King David.
Who committed
an adulterer and a murderer.
Yes, yeah, and the story of Joseph is a rare story in the Bible. Most of the people in the Bible are incredibly flawed, other than Joseph of the many-colored coat. And who knows what the story was? We only get the part that's written about him. When you were talking earlier about scoundrels, I like the one that you're looking at right now. I'm a scoundrel too, of course. We all are. And when we reflect on mortal sin.
Listen, Mike. You think any one of us? You think any one of us is going to be able to stand side by side, looking into God's face, and think He's not a scoundrel?
Only our Blessed Mother. Only our Blessed Mother. So,
right.
Yeah, it's.
Let me just remind you also that all of those men that we were talking about, Moses, David, all of them in the Old Testament, and some of them were real scoundrels. They're all of them referred to in the Oriental churches, and these are the Roman Catholic Oriental churches, the Saint Moses, Saint David. All of them are Saint. You don't just say Moses, Saint Moses, Saint David.
Saint Abraham, another flawed man.
Saint Abraham, right? Yes.
And, it's funny. I think the average American hears that Capucci, who's a Greek Arab, basically, goes to Iran. Everyone thinks, well, they're all Arabs. Well, Iranians are not Arabs. They're Persians. It's a whole different culture. They don't see themselves as Arabs. And yet he was able to bridge those two cultures and get the bodies of our soldiers back. And had things going on properly, we would have had the hostages back almost a year earlier than what we got them. Which, again, I think is fascinating. The other thing is you talked about the Carter-Reagan election. Remember, Carter, who was the sitting president, also had a Democratic competitor in Kennedy. Kennedy ran against him, the younger brother. So, we have an embattled president who's trying to get our soldiers back from the Middle East, trying to get the hostages back. And in the end, Reagan probably won that election because Carter couldn't get them back. There just was no way he was getting them back. So I find this all very fascinating. And I don't want to give the whole story away because we want people to buy the book, obviously. But
I won't give the whole story away either. But I will say this: in 1983, Archbishop Joseph Khoury was kidnapped.
Right. That's where I was going.
And I'll leave it there.
Well, I want to give away one other plot point, if you let me, Father, and that is you actually asked for help, and we're told what? For Archbishop Curry, you went to Father. I keep wanting to say Father.
Oh, yes. Well, that's the whole thing. That's the whole point. Do you remember the beautiful parable when our Lord says a father went to his two sons? And said, help me in the vineyard. One said, yes, I'll go immediately, Father. And he didn't. The other one said no, but then repented and went. And our Lord said, which of the two is the better son? Well, okay. I just leave it at that. Initially, Capucci said no. He would not help. That's all. I'll leave it there. But I'll tell you something else too. And I think it's another fascinating story. I went to Rome to see Archbishop Capucci. He was 92 years old at the time. Sharp as a tack. I said, I need to talk to you. He said, Père Charles. He was all excited and everything. I said, I'll come out to Father Charles. Père Charles or Père Charles always. I said, he was living in Eur, the new Rome, right? I said, I'll go out to see you. He said, no. He said, let's meet in Santa Marta. I said, but that's where the new Pope lives, in Santa Marta. He said, yeah. He said, it's a good meeting place. I said, you can get in just like that? He said, just meet me there. Anyway, we met there. On the other side of the wall, without exaggerating, was Pope Francis having lunch. But we were in a parlor, and I said, I'm here to ask your permission to tell this story because it's kind of a delicate matter. And if you don't give permission, I won't write it. If you do give permission, I want to write this story. And he said to me, he answered in a very curious way, the Archbishop. He said, I want you to go see Dr. X, right? An Arabic name, meant nothing to me. I said, yes, and what? He said, ask him for permission to tell the story. He knows the whole story. He knows the whole story. If you get his permission, then you have my permission. I said, fine, where is he? He said, in New York. Well, I'm from New York. I said, great. You're serious? Yeah, I'll go see him. Well, he was the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, this man, right?
Okay.
And I went to go see him. I've never seen anything like it. I'll bet he was 7 feet tall. I'm serious. I've never felt so short in my life. I was 5'9". I think I'm shrinking now, but I was 5'9" when I met him, and he towered over me. But a fascinating man. He was the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, and a brilliant man holding a lot of pieces of the puzzle together of the Middle East, not just Syria. Anyway, I sat down with him. He received me. He got a call from Capucci. And when I called him, he said, yes. He said, the Archbishop have called me. He said, when can you come in? I said, you tell me. Anyway, we met in the Syrian mission to the United Nations. And we spoke for over an hour. He gave me permission, and he filled me in on a few details also of the story that I didn't know. I didn't know before. So I contacted Capucci again. We both did in his office, and Capucci said, fine, if it's all set up, then let Father Charles tell the story, which I did. I sat down when I got back home and started writing it. So that's the story of the story. I don't want to say anything more about it because I think it does have a surprise and beautiful ending. And I wouldn't want to give that away. Let me say this. I made an attempt to write what I thought was going to be a great novel. And the problem was with it, it was about 400 pages. Actually, the original manuscript was 3,200 pages.
Wow.
Seriously. It took years, but it was cathartic. I wanted to get all of this out. Okay. And I did. It was cathartic. It was also painful. Parts of it were very painful. Other parts were joyous, beautiful. But anyway, I gave it to an editor. He read through the manuscript and he said, Father, you've got 5 books here. He said, this isn't a story. He said, these are at least 5 different books. And I said, well, I don't see it that way. And he said, well, I do. That's what I do for a living. And he said, I'm telling you, that's what you've got. Well, anyway, I went ahead with his great help, and we cut out. Do you know how difficult it is to pull away parts of what you wrote? No, don't take that out. And you have to rely on an editor as an operating doctor, right? He knows what goes and what stays. Anyway, right. The long and the short of it was, I published a book. I got a book, the first book, called The Society of Judas. That's what I called it. It was reduced to 400 pages, but it was still 5 different books. It was still 5 different stories. I mean, you could, by reading it, you could extrapolate 5 different stories. Anyway, I made a few mistakes by that, and I hope some future writers are listening, because I'm going to admit these mistakes. One was I had to decide how to write. I love writing dialogue, because dialogue tells you the mindset of the people without you're listening to them say A, but you're understanding them saying B. You understand their motives for this. Fulton Sheen, who's my one of my great people in my life, a saint. I don't care if they canonize him or not. He's a saint, and he should be canonized, and he should be degreed doctor of communications, modern communication.
Agreed.
But anyway, Fulton J. Sheen said this, and I studied psychology at NYU under Dr. Paul Vitz, who was fantastic, a fantastic man, still alive and still teaching at NYU. And Sheen said to all psychologists, which I thought was great, he said, don't listen so much to what a man says as to why he says it. Okay. And when you're writing, that's what you're trying to convey, the why of what somebody's saying, not so much what they're saying, but you're trying to get in the motive. Anyway, I wrote this book the way people talked. And in parts of the book, the way some of the characters I was with were talking was horrific. I mean, they didn't speak slang. They spoke down and out, low down. Well, I decided, I'm going to write the way they spoke. Bad move, bad move, right? Because I alienated half of my audience right there, right? Anyway, there were a number of mistakes I made with that. Now that was like 20 years ago. I've written books since then. And you get to develop an ease and a style, and you're better with it. I'm going back now and doing that book over again.
Oh, that's exciting.
I think I've got it. So, it's dealing. But see here, the subject matter too is delicate because it deals with kidnappings, murders, drug lords, and the assassination of a cardinal in Mexico, right? All real things that actually I was part of, I was involved in. So it's not, they're not niceties. These aren't nice stories. Some of them they're gritty, they're dirty, horrible. Some of them are horrible, but they have to be told. They have to be told, and I mean that not just for the sensationalism of it. There's something to be learned in all of these things, and I hope, Michael, what the greatest lesson that's going to come from this book is how to forgive.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.